door always closed a little louder than it needed to. Not slammed, just firm enough to echo down the hallway before settling back into quiet. Shoes were kicked off near the mat, never lined up, never corrected. The house felt warmer than the air outside, like it had been holding its breath until you came in. Somewhere in the kitchen, a spoon tapped gently against the side of a pot, not to get attention, just enough to say it was there. The light that time of day didn't rush. It stretched across the floor, catching dust in the air, softening the corners of things you'd seen every day. Steam rose near the stove, fogging the window just slightly, and the smell, milk, chocolate, something familiar, found you before any words did. Back then, it felt ordinary, almost invisible. But was it just another afternoon, or the beginning of something we'd carry longer than we realized? The walk home always felt slower than the walk there, not because the distance changed, but because the day had settled into your shoulders by then. The straps of your backpack pressed a little harder, the weight of notebooks and folders mixed with things you couldn't really name. Conversations from the classroom lingered in fragments. A teacher's voice, laughter from the hallway, the echo of a bell that no longer mattered. By the time the house came into view, everything began to loosen. Steps softened. Breathing slowed. There was no rush anymore. No one was timing you. No one was waiting for an answer. Just the familiar shape of the front door, the quiet promise of inside. You didn't knock. You never needed to. The door opened with a sound you knew so well you hardly noticed it. A small creak, a soft click, the faint sigh of hinges that had done this thousands of times before. The air inside wrapped around you immediately, warmer, calmer, unchanged by whatever the day had been. For a moment, you stayed right there, backpack still on, hand still on the door, listening. The low hum of the refrigerator, a radio murmuring from another room, footsteps moving slowly, unhurried. These sounds didn't demand anything. They simply let you arrive. At the time, it felt like nothing special, just the space between school and the rest of the day. But looking back now, that pause, those few quiet seconds, was already part of the comfort. It was the first sign that you were home, and that for a little while, the world would ask less of you. The kitchen always felt different in the afternoon. Not busy like the mornings, not dim and tired like later at night. It sat somewhere in between, filled with a soft kind of purpose. The counters held a few familiar things, nothing new, nothing staged. A mug already waiting, a spoon resting near the stove, the same small stain on the countertop that never quite came out. The light came in sideways through the window, landing on the table instead of the sink. It made the room feel slower, as if time itself had decided to sit down for a moment. Outside, cars passed now and then, but their sounds were muted, filtered through glass and distance. Inside, everything felt contained. Your mother didn't rush. She moved the way someone does when there's no reason to hurry. Milk warmed on the stove, watched but not fussed over. The pot was never too big, never too small, just the one that had always been used. When the spoon touched the sides, it made a quiet, familiar sound. Not a signal, just a rhythm. There wasn't much talking then. Maybe a simple question about the day, maybe nothing at all. Words weren't required to make the moment feel complete. The kitchen held its own language, warmth, routine, and the understanding that this part of the day belonged to you. At the time, it felt ordinary, a room you passed through without thinking. Only later did it become clear how carefully that hour had been shaped, how gently it waited for you every single afternoon. It was never called a ritual, of course. No one announced it. No one marked the time. It simply happened the same way it always had, as if the afternoon itself had learned what came next. The pot was placed on the stove. Milk poured in without measuring. Cocoa followed, tapped lightly from the tin, leaving a faint dust on the counter that would be wiped away later. Your mother stirred slowly, not because it required attention, but because that was how it had always been done. The spoon traced the same circle again and again, steady and unbroken. Steam began to rise, carrying a smell that felt older than the day itself. Sweet, warm, familiar enough to quiet your thoughts without trying. Sometimes she added a little sugar, sometimes not. It depended on the day, or maybe on nothing at all. The recipe was never written down. It lived in her hands, in the way she tilted the spoon, in how she knew when the milk was ready without checking the clock. You watched from the table or leaned against the counter, homework still untouched. There was no pressure to begin, no reminder of what came next. Just the quiet understanding that this moment existed on its own. At the time, it seemed small, just a drink. But it wasn't really about the chocolate. It was about repetition, about knowing that no matter how the day had gone, this part would remain exactly the same. While the milk warmed, there was nothing you were supposed to do. That was the strange and comforting part. Homework could wait. Stories from the day could wait too. Time stretched gently, unbothered by schedules or expectations. You might swing your legs under the chair or rest your elbows on the table, tracing old marks in the wood with your fingers. The sound of the spoon moving in the pot became a kind of background music, not loud enough to distract, not quiet enough to disappear. It filled the space between thoughts. Every now and then, the stove made a small click as the heat adjusted itself, as if even it knew not to hurry. Sometimes you looked out the window. The afternoon outside was still moving, people walking home, cars passing, the world continuing on without noticing you'd stepped out of it for a moment. Inside, though, nothing pulled at you. You were allowed to just be there. Your mother didn't check the time. She didn't say, "Almost ready," or "Just a minute." The waiting wasn't something to get through. It was part of the experience, a quiet lesson in patience that didn't feel like one. Only later does that stand out, the fact that no one rushed you forward, that the pause itself was offered freely, warm and unclaimed, like the space between breaths. The mug was placed in front of you carefully, as if it mattered where it landed. Steam rose slowly, curling into the air before fading. The surface of the hot chocolate was smooth, almost still, with a thin ring of foam around the edges. You wrapped your hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into your palms before you even tasted it. That first sip was always cautious. The heat demanded respect. You blew on it without thinking, lips barely touching the rim. When you finally tasted it, the flavor arrived gently, rich but not overwhelming, sweet but never sharp. It didn't rush, it stayed. The warmth moved downward, settling somewhere deeper than your stomach. Shoulders relaxed, thoughts softened. Whatever had followed you home from school began to loosen its grip, not all at once, but enough. Your mother might have watched for a moment, or she might have turned back to the sink, already rinsing the pot. There was no need for approval. The drink spoke for itself. At the time, you didn't analyze it. You just drank. But now, it's hard not to notice how much care lived in that first sip, how something so simple could quiet a day, how warmth, offered consistently, could become a kind of language all its own. After the first few sips, the room usually grew quieter. Not empty, just settled. This was the part of the afternoon that didn't need filling. Your mother might ask a gentle question about school, the kind that didn't demand a full story. "How was your day?" Or sometimes just, "Everything okay?" The words were soft, open-ended, ready to be met or left alone. Sometimes you answered with details, a test, a friend, something small that had felt big earlier. Other times, you shrugged and took another sip. Both responses were acceptable. Silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like understanding. The chair creaked slightly when you shifted. The mug cooled little by little, warmth still lingering even as the steam disappeared. Outside, the afternoon continued to drift toward evening, but inside, the moment stayed exactly where it was. That space between speaking and not speaking was rarely acknowledged, yet it held something important. It taught you that connection didn't always need explanation, that being present could be enough. Only later does that quiet stand out. Not the words that were said, but the ones that didn't need to be. The comfort of knowing you could exist in that room exactly as you were without performing your day for anyone. As the year moved on, the afternoons began to look different. In winter, the light faded earlier, slipping away before the mug was half empty. The windows felt colder to the touch, and the steam from the hot chocolate seemed thicker, more necessary. In warmer months, sunlight lingered, spilling across the table and making the drink feel almost out of place, but it was made anyway. Your clothes changed with the seasons. Heavier coats were dropped by the door. Later, lighter jackets took their place. Shoes left faint traces of snow, then rain, then dust. But the kitchen stayed the same. The same pot, the same mug, the same quiet rhythm. You didn't think about it then. Routine has a way of hiding itself. It feels permanent when you're inside it, as if it will always be there waiting. The days blurred together, each afternoon folding gently into the next. Only much later does the contrast become clear. How everything else shifted, school years, schedules, responsibilities, while that small ritual remained steady. It wasn't resisting change. It was simply offering continuity. And maybe that's why it feels so strong now. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was constant. Because no matter how the world outside transformed, that moment in the kitchen stayed the same, quietly marking time without ever asking to be noticed. If you tried to measure it now, the numbers would seem almost insignificant. 10 minutes, maybe 15. A small pot of milk, a spoonful or two of cocoa. The cost was minimal, the effort barely noticeable. It happened on ordinary weekdays, not holidays or special occasions. Nothing about it would stand out on a calendar. And yet, if it happened most afternoons, 5 days a week, over years, that time adds up. Hundreds of mugs, thousands of small circles stirred in the same pot. Hours spent sitting at the same table, hands wrapped around the same shape, waiting for the drink to cool just enough. Back then, afternoons moved differently. School ended earlier. Homework waited patiently. Dinner was still a distant idea. There was space between obligations that doesn't always exist later in life. Space that allowed something like this to happen without being planned. The facts are simple. The meaning isn't. Those minutes weren't marked as important when they were happening. They didn't announce themselves. They just repeated quietly until they became part of the background of growing up. Only now does it feel clear that this was time being given, not efficiently, not dramatically, but consistently. And sometimes, consistency is what lasts the longest. There comes a point when the memory shifts. Not suddenly, but gently. Like noticing a sound that's been there all along. Maybe it happens years later, standing in a different kitchen. Maybe it comes with the first sip of a drink that tastes close, but not quite the same. That's when it becomes clear it was never just about hot chocolate. It was about being expected, about someone shaping part of their day around your return without making a show of it. The pot wasn't on the stove by accident. The mug didn't appear by chance. Care was built into the routine so quietly that it almost disappeared. As a child, you receive these things without naming them. You assume they belong to the world, the way afternoons in kitchens do. It's only with distance that the effort becomes visible, the choice to repeat something, the patience to do it again, even on tired days. Memory smooths the edges, of course. It forgets the interruptions, the rushed afternoons, the days it didn't happen. But the feeling remains intact. Warmth, safety, being held without being held. That's when gratitude arrives, not loud or dramatic, but steady. Not for the drink itself, but for what it carried. For the way love can hide in plain sight, waiting for time to teach us how to recognize it. Now, the kitchen is different. The sounds have changed. The mugs don't quite match, and the light falls in unfamiliar ways. You make hot chocolate for yourself sometimes, maybe without thinking, maybe on a day that feels longer than it should. You follow no recipe. You just know when it's ready. The taste is close enough to pause you, close enough to bring back the warmth in your hands, the quiet of that room, the feeling of being allowed to rest before the rest of life began again. It doesn't stay long. Memories rarely do, but it lingers just enough. You realize you've been carrying that ritual with you all along, in the way you slow down when someone comes home, in the small comforts you offer without explanation, in the pauses you protect, even when time feels tight. The afternoon itself is gone. That house, that kitchen, that exact moment, changed or distant now. But the feeling still finds its way back, unannounced, when you need it. Maybe that's why it remains so vivid. Not because it belonged to the past, but because it quietly taught you how to create warmth. And perhaps that's what you were really remembering all along. Not the taste, but the care that stayed with you.